Today, we are breaking down our top 36 rest of season wide receiver rankings, and we're going to do it in a little bit of a new format as opposed to just doing a tier list and kind of going over all of the players. What me and Danny are going to do is for the rest of the year, meaning for the fantasy playoffs, weeks 15 through 17, we are going to draft our fantasy wide receiver rankings and kind of come up with a consensus as a result of the draft that we're going to be doing here. So we're going to go through from picks 1 through 36 and come up with a consensus top 36 wide receiver rankings. If you guys do want all of our rankings, those are, of course, available over on flockfantasy.com. But this one should be an interesting take on like a top 36 wide receiver tier list. And we will be doing this Friday for running backs as well.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, the wide receiver position this year, has it been as strong comparative to running back as past years? Maybe not, but at the same time, as we'll go through, there's a ton of high ceiling options that you want on your teams in these fantasy playoffs. There's simply players that can change the whole complexion of your matchups.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be excited to see, I have your wide receiver 8, 9, and 13 on my fantasy team going into the playoffs or whatever. So, Danny, we rolled a dice, flipped a coin before, and it looks like I am going to be selecting with the first overall pick here. And the wide receiver 1 currently in fantasy scoring, the wide receiver 1 that I will be taking here is Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals, currently averaging 24.4 PPR points per game. He's got 3 absolutely monster ceiling games that we've seen from him. There's absolutely no other wide receiver that I would rather have for the rest of the year. Even looking at his strength of schedule, I mean, he plays the Titans this week, which is a little bit of a tougher matchup, but the Browns and Broncos, even the next 2 games, I feel pretty good about, knowing that the way the Broncos deploy the Patrick Surtain, they sometimes put him on T. Higgins. So I feel very strongly that Chase is the 101 wide receiver 1 here.
Yeah, I think it's pretty remarkable what he's doing right now. He is the only wide receiver in fantasy football averaging over 20 PPR points per game, and he's all the way up at 24.4. For reference, when we're looking at the top 2 wide receivers last year, we were talking about how dominant CeeDee Lamb was, how dominant Tyreek Hill was. Ja'Marr Chase is at 24.4 points. Both those guys last year at 23.7 for Lamb, at 23.5 for Tyreek, respectively. So Ja'Marr Chase is at an even another level than those guys. And we don't have like a Keenan Allen from last year at 21.5. We don't have an Amon St. Brown at 20.7, a Justin Jefferson at 20.2. So the gap between Ja'Marr Chase and the entire wide receiver landscape at this current point is as big as we've seen maybe even since Christian McCaffrey back when he was dominating the running back position.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the wide receiver 2 spot, I think, is a lot more debatable. There's probably a couple different options that many people would go with here. Who are you going to go with? I'm pretty sure I know who it's going to end up being, but let's see who you're going with.
For me, it's a no-brainer. This guy's actually the wide receiver 2 in PPR points per game, and that's even factoring the fact that he left 2 games early with injury. And we're talking about Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. Like I said, he is averaging 19.5 PPR points per game. When you're looking at the 2 games that he left early in, 9.4 PPR points, 15.8. If you isolated out those 2 games, you're looking at a legitimate 21, 22 PPR point per game score. Has CJ Stroud kind of taken a step back from where he was at last year? Sure. But at the same time, we still know that when he's on his game, he's a top 10 level quarterback. Nico Collins has proven to be the alpha of all alphas. And when you're actually looking at the overall playoff stretch, is it the strongest playoff schedule? Maybe not. But we do have some potential nice game environments in terms of over-unders. Obviously, they're playing the Chiefs, I believe, next week. With Nico Collins, really, when I'm looking at the wide receiver landscape, I just think he presents the type of ceiling that can combat with Ja'Marr Chase. Is he going to outscore Ja'Marr Chase moving forward? Probably not, because of what Chase is doing overall in the landscape. But Nico Collins, we know he's got the size. We know he's got the speed. You know he's got the touchdown equity. And if CJ Stroud starts playing closer to where he was as a rookie, maybe he does have that 24, 25 point per game ceiling rest away.
Yeah, Dolphins, Chiefs, and Ravens. Only the Ravens are like an easy matchup of those wide receiver,
17 though,
secondaries. But yeah, that is in the championship week, which is when it matters most. And also too, like you said, the Dolphins, Chiefs, and Ravens, those could all profile to be high over/under type of game environments. So you can throw Nico up on the board there. Wide receiver 3, I probably would have gone with Nico as well. He is my wide receiver 2 ranked for the rest of the way as well. In terms of actual wide receiver 3 scoring, in terms of who's actually the wide receiver 3 right now, it is Puka Nacua, assuming we exclude Chris Godwin, who's out for the rest of the year. I am not going to go with Puka Nacua because I do believe that there is a better, safer option. I'm just going to go with Justin Jefferson here because with Jefferson, you got a guy who's scoring at a very high level, had a little bit of a lull for about a month up until last week where he was like a
bad touchdown stretch.
Yeah, just bad touchdown luck. He didn't score a touchdown, I believe, almost in 2 months. But he's averaging 18.1 PPR points per game. He's got a 30% target share on a team that's 10-2 right now. So I feel pretty confident that Justin Jefferson is the type of guy that can close out your season very, very strongly. And it's not the best schedule for him either. Bears, Seahawks, and Packers. None of those are really favorable matchups other than the Seahawks in week 16. So not a great schedule for him, but he's Justin Jefferson. I really don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it's Justin Jefferson at the end of the day. Like I mentioned with Nico Collins, 19.5 PPR points per game. Jefferson is lagging a little bit behind comparatively to what we've expected. Like I mentioned last year, he's at 20.2, at 18.1. But the way Darnold has been playing, I mean, it's crazy to say that he's one of the top 3 to 5 MVP candidates at this point, but with how the Vikings record has been, and Darnold, I believe, is currently top 3 to 5 in touchdown passes, it actually provides a nice little safety in terms of these Vikings offensive projections. So with Justin Jefferson, I mean, we finally saw the touchdown regression come back this past week. 2 touchdowns this past game. For reference, in the 6 games prior, was not able to get on the board. And like you said, at the end of the day, when you're defaulting between some really, really close options, just taking arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL is a good spot to be. So we can move on to the next pick here. And you mentioned the name Puka Nacua. Obviously, he's going to be my pick here based on what he's been doing on the healthy games he's played this past year. If you're looking at his splits since week 10, so obviously, as we know, he played week 1, got banged up. That was a song and dance, right? When we're looking at his splits, like I said, since week 10, with Cooper Kupp on the field, with the way Matthew Stafford has been playing, Puka Nacua has still been the wide receiver 1 on this team. 30% target share, 35% target share, 41%, 38%, 47% in each of the 5 games since week 10. And when you're looking at his overall scoring, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 9, wide receiver 18. And then obviously this past week, wide receiver 2 against the Buffalo Bills. Really, it's just a bet on his talent. It's a bet on Matthew Stafford. It's a bet on Sean McVay. And it's a bet on him continuing this type of usage.
Yeah, no, there's not much else to say about Puka Nacua. He's leading all receivers right now with 37% targets per route run, meaning when he's out there and he's running routes, even if he's banged up on some of those routes, he's still just commanding targets. And last week's game against the Bills was a perfect example of how many plays did he make where Burkhardt and Brady on the call are just like, what a catch, like what a play.
That sideline one.
There was like 4 of them in the game that I saw. So that's what Puka brings to the table. He's definitely taken another step in his career.
Last thing on Puka, I mentioned since week 10, in that stretch, 24.8 PPR points per game. Like I mentioned, that's about what Jamar Chase has been doing. So even though Jamar Chase, I would say on the season holistically, is a tier above the rest of the wide receiver position, we are seeing these few names, at least for the playoff stretch, having ceilings that can at least combat it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking at the next option here, and there's a couple different names that would factor in for me. St. Brown, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb. There's a number of guys that you could factor in here. I am going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown just because I feel like St. Brown is the safest option because I have the best football team in the world right now with the Detroit Lions, where Amon-Ra St. Brown is their leading receiver, has that week winning upside that we've seen from him. Just a couple of weeks ago, he had a monster game. So for me with St. Brown, he's the wide receiver 7 in points per game right now. Schedule's not great, but he does avoid a lot of those like number 1 corners because he's a slot receiver. So I feel good about St. Brown here. There's not much else to say, only that I would want to tether myself to the Detroit Lions offense for the rest of the year. And playing against Buffalo this week, that is a 54.5 point over-under game. Like, you want players in that game environment. They're playing the Bears and the 49ers their last 2 games. Again, profile is tougher matchups for wide receivers, but still the Lions just kind of overcome all matchups and they're able to score points no matter who they're playing.
Yeah, I think that's a fair pick. I think we do go down a tier from those top 4 options. I think all those top 4 options can kind of combat for the wide receiver 1 overall rest of the way. And I would say these next few names, again, you mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown. We'll talk about a couple of these other names, kind of figure into that, safe mid-end wide receiver 1 projection. So again, really like Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously tethered to that Detroit offense. But the guy that I actually have ranked at 5 here is Tyreek Hill. And the reason why I have Tyreek Hill up here is we've seen the ceiling come back these last 2 weeks, 20 PPR points in each of his last 2 games. And even since week 8, once Tua Tagovailoa come back, obviously we know he had that kind of slow stretch in the middle portion of the year. But since Tua's come back in week 8, 13.2, 12, 11.7, 19.1, 9.8 is where he plateaued. But as we've seen, of course, in these last 2 weeks, 20.3 and 28.1 in terms of his PPR points. It looks like the wrist injury hasn't been bothering him. This Miami offense really looks like it's bounced back. Tua Tagovailoa is arguably playing his best ball of his career. And although we have kind of inconveniences like a guy like Johnny Smith, obviously Devon Achane getting more targets in the passing game, we've seen Tyreek Hill deliver in the last 2 weeks, and there's no reason for me to believe that can't continue.
Yeah, and the Dolphins have the Texans this week, which is a good matchup. 49ers in week 16, not as good, but then Cleveland in week 17, assuming there's not any weather concerns in that game, should be a good spot for him there. So I did have I have Puka ranked 6 and I had St. Brown ranked 4. So I kind of disagree a little bit on the point that you said is like a tier above or whatever. I think they're all kind of in the same general vicinity. This would be between two NFC East wide receivers for me here. It's either AJ Brown or CeeDee Lamb. And the way I look at it is this: AJ Brown and the Philadelphia Eagles offense are kind of poor vibes at the moment, even though I trust in a vacuum AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts over what Cooper Rush has been playing like without Dak Prescott on the field. I got the Carolina Panthers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers the next 2 weeks for CeeDee Lamb, so I'm going to roll with Lamb at 107 here as my wide receiver 7. I did actually, coming into this exercise, have AJ one spot higher, but the more I think about it, the way that the Philadelphia Eagles have played on offense, they have Pittsburgh this week, Washington, who's been playing a little bit better on defense in week 16, and then of course the Cowboys in week 17, which is a good matchup for him, but it's 2 out of 3 that are a little bit more difficult for AJ. And I mean, they're asking him questions in interviews right now. What are you doing bad right now? And he just goes, passing. Like, it just doesn't seem like a good situation right now. AJ's the wide receiver 12, having, a Jalen Hurts healthy all season, and the Eagles are running the ball like absolute crazy. And CeeDee Lamb, without his quarterback for a couple of these games, is the wide receiver 8 in points per game.
Yeah, with CeeDee Lamb, again, it's funny that you mentioned that because I literally had that exact scenario. My 6 to 8 range is the range I was referring to. And I think actually Jefferson's probably in that for me. Personally, I actually do view Puka as really close to Nico and Jamar Chase. But again, that's my micro differences in my own rankings. I have a Monra at 6, CeeDee Lamb at 7, and the guy I'm going to be taking next at 108. With CeeDee Lamb, you outlined it, and it's funny because I was expecting that I would have to make the case for CeeDee Lamb, but glad to see that you're on board, because when we're looking at since the bye week for CeeDee Lamb, it's just the target involvement that you really can't get over. So he had his bye week in week 7. Those first 6 games, even with Dak, he just wasn't really getting the volume that we would typically see from CeeDee Lamb. But since that bye week, man, the guy's been on an absolute tear. So when we're isolating, since week 8 is when the Cowboys had their bye week, CeeDee Lamb, 17.8 PPR points per game in that sample. And that's really only getting brought down by one terrible game that he had in week 13. Yeah, he didn't come down with a couple of targets. He didn't end up finishing the game. Obviously left early against the Giants. But when you're looking at his other games, I mean, you're talking about 17, 12, 10, 12, 12, 6. And then he had only 7 this past week. But on those 7 targets, we saw 6 catches, 93 yards, and a receiving touchdown. You combine that, of course, like you said, with a very favorable matchups moving forward. I think he's perfectly fine being at this range.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you going to roll with, is AJ going to be your pick here, or are you going to go with somebody different?
I think I got to go with AJ Brown. I understand, like you said, the vibes aren't all there with the Philadelphia Eagles right now. But at the same time, like you said, this is going to be an offense that's going to be implied for one of the top 3 to 5 totals on a week-to-week basis. Obviously, we know AJ Brown, superstar level player. And we did see this happen in the last couple of years where AJ Brown a little bit concerned with the passing volume, and then we kind of seen that get righted. And with AJ Brown, I mean, even if he's only getting 6 to 8 targets because the Eagles are throwing the ball 25 times, he, outside of maybe Jamar Chase, is the best yak threat in the league.
Yeah. It's pretty hard to deny that there's going to be a game here soon where AJ Brown reminds everyone how good AJ Brown is.
Like a 37-pointer.
The week that we're doing this exercise, the AJ Brown Eagles offense is kind of on the downslope right now, but there's a reason that I would still include him kind of in this tier with St. Brown, with Tyreek, with Lamb. And because on any given week, depending on what they did the previous week, we could say this guy's over that guy. It's just kind of reactionary right now that AJ Brown's a little bit on the downslope. And like I mentioned, he does have 2 kind of difficult matchups the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, for sure. But we can go on to your 109, and I'm curious where you lean here because, like we mentioned, I view like the top 3 to 4 kind of in that area, the next 4 kind of in a different area, and then obviously this is kind of where it gets a little bit open, and I think I know where you're leaning.
I don't think you do, because maybe you do. I'm not sure. So based on how they've scored so far this year, the wide receiver 5, the wide receiver 9, and the wide receiver 10 in points per game are still on the board right now. And we took AJ Brown, who's actually outside of this territory. We took Tyreek Hill, who's outside of this territory. So I am going to go with the guy who has performed all season long, despite his situation having another alpha wide receiver there. And I'm going to take Cooper Kupp here. And I didn't really on the board. I was like, oh man, do I want to go with Kupp? Do I want to go with a couple other guys who are at least more like dominant alpha wide receivers? But I'm going to go with Kupp just because the Rams, while they have a pretty bad schedule, if I'm being honest here, the rest of the season with the 49ers, the Jets, and then the Cardinals in week 17, there's like not really any of those three defenses are all like above average pass defenses. But I think Stafford and the Rams are just operating at such a level where they're throwing the ball very up tempo. They're moving the ball on offense at will.
They just scored 44 against Buffalo.
Exactly. Even if Cooper Kupp is not quite the same player that he was in 2021 or whatever, he's still scoring as the wide receiver 5 in fantasy right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's at what, about 18 PPR points per game, 18 and a half PPR points per game.
Yeah, with a 29% target share. Again, there's some games in there that it was a little skewed by because Puka wasn't out there or whatever the case is. But even games where Puka's been on the field, these guys have both been able to operate in tandem.
Yeah, when you isolate out the game that he literally only played 52% of the snaps in week 2 when he got hurt against Arizona, you're looking at a near 20 PPR point per game score. So even though I said ooh, like it's not like ooh as in like that's completely off the board. Like I have Cooper Kupp well within a range of a few guys, and I think it's very worthwhile to have him there. I do have him at 12, but like we'll talk about in a second, these 4 names I think you can really pick out of a hat. The guy I'm going to lead next and the guy on your favorite team. I mean, we've talked about the schedule for you guys. We've talked about trying to get Big Mike over the 1K plateau. And although that kind of took a little bit of a detour this week, as soon as I take his yardage prop on underdog, he wants to have a 69-yard game. We still love the involvement that Mike Evans gets. Again, it's pretty simple. Touchdown equity on your offense. An offense that's going to be implied for about 23 to 26 points on a week in, week out basis. And as we know, like we said, with no Chris Godwin on the field, he's getting an alpha level target share.
Yeah, and you actually have him ranked higher than I do. I actually have him at 14 right now, so I'm a little bit lower on him than even you are, and it's not really anything that he does wrong.
It's a close range.
He's not quite the level of alpha that some of the other guys that I have ranked ahead of him are. Even if he's on a better offense than like 2 or 3 of these guys, I feel a little bit stronger about the target shares and the production we've seen so far from some of these guys, especially. And speaking of which, the guy that I was about to take at 109, that I may have gone with instead of Cooper Kupp. You might think this is Jackson Smith-Njigba, but it is Malik Neighbors instead. Because Malik Neighbors currently is the league leader in target share right now. So I realize he has Drew Lock and he has absolutely no shot in hell of being, on an offense that's going to score a lot of points. But Malik Neighbors is simply too good, and the offense simply just feeds him the ball too much for him to, in PPR scoring, not be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, especially when you look at the fact that he has the single easiest strength of schedule of any wide receiver for the rest of the year. He has the Ravens this week, the Falcons the week after, and the Colts in week 17. So
you mentioned wide receiver 1. I technically have him as my wide receiver 13. So he's the first of the wide receiver 2s. But like I said, I mean, we're in a range right now where we can really pick names out of a hat. Obviously, we know with Malik Neighbors, is he going to have the offensive insulation that some of these other guys do? No, which is why I would favor a guy like Mike Evans. However, like you said, he just commands targets at a different level than a guy like Mike Evans. So you're kind of getting offset with the overall offensive experience or environment. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. It's what do you value here? Do you value the guy who's going to command a good target share and a great offense, or a guy commanding like 35% of the team's targets is simply just elite? Like if he was commanding a 28% target share, he'd probably be wide receiver 16 or 17 for me, because that's not good enough to overrule the fact that you had Drew Lock throwing you the football. But when you're guaranteed like 9 to 12 targets every single week, it's pretty much impossible not to be a wide receiver 1 in PPR.
Yeah, and I mean, we were just talking about how Jamar Chase after the catch, AJ Brown after the catch, Malik Neighbors ain't far off those guys. So no. I don't mind that shout there, taking him at the 111 spot. Now we got the final pick of the first round here. And I mean, we've been talking about this guy for the last few picks, so I may as well just take him now. I got to give Jackson Smith-Njigba his flowers, man. I can't believe where we're at. I literally just a month ago was calling this guy overrated and one of the biggest sells both in redraft and in dynasty. So, hey, we can celebrate all of our wins, but sometimes you got to take the L's on the chin. And JSN was a guy that I actually had one of my top 5 exposures on underdog, a guy that I was all over the breakout coming into the year. We didn't really see it start materializing until DK Metcalf got hurt. Initially, he was kind of just used as this slot wide receiver, similar to the projection that we saw last year. But as soon as DK Metcalf got hurt, it's almost like Ryan Grubb opened up the playbook, said, okay, what was working for JSN at Ohio State, which is why he was a guy that was able to outproduce Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave in his sophomore year. And it's almost like he just dialed up everything that was working, and we've seen JSN become the player we were talking about in his recent games. I mean, we're talking about a guy, even with DK Metcalf on the field in these past couple of weeks, Since the bye week, 11 targets, 10 receptions, 110 receiving yards, 21.8, 19.7 PPR points, 11.9, 19.6. And when you're also counting in those 2 games prior, 12.9 and 37, we're legitimately looking at a wide receiver 1 profile. Again, he does have a little bit more risk, like you said, because there is a guy like DK Metcalf still on the team. But at the same time, if he's getting this level of involvement, we've seen multiple situations where 2 wide receivers can coexist. And in fact, we literally have 2 of them in the same round here with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua.
Yeah, I will say with JSN, he is wide receiver 15 in points per game right now with 15.3 because he hasn't quite been consistent all year. But again, it's great that he's producing now as opposed to
20.5 since week 8.
Yeah, he's been great. I just, I actually do have one more guy ahead of him, and we'll try and speed through more as we get through this. So this one's gonna be a pretty straightforward example. This is just a guy that is a complete and utter alpha who's starting to play a little bit better and who has finished, or who has outscored JSN to this point in the year. I'm gonna go with Garrett Wilson. Aaron Rodgers is playing well right now. Garrett Wilson has the Jaguars, the Rams, and the Bills the next 3 weeks, which are none of whom are really daunting fantasy matchups. So I feel good that Wilson's just going to probably have a lot of targets and hopefully some big plays like we saw from him last week.
Yeah, I think that's a worthwhile shout. He was actually the 2nd highest ranked wide receiver I still have on the board. And obviously I'll take my highest ranked in a second, but you pretty much outlined it. Also, no Breece Hall. So that could be a potential factor in terms of the consolidation of the target share. Yes, we know Devontae Adams can get his, but at the same time, we know it's Garrett Wilson, it's Devontae Adams. And if Breece Hall's not on the field, we know Aaron Rodgers is going to be looking at those 2 guys basically almost every single read. So yeah, I like Garrett Wilson at the spot. I think wide receiver 13, wide receiver 14 feels like a good range for him. The guy that I actually do have 1 spot higher though, and it's funny because he was in his draft class and he was actually a guy that we both had ranked as our wide receiver 1 in that class. We have Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. And when we're looking at the recent games, I guess the cause for concern for Drake London would be, well, if Kirk Cousins is struggling this much, what exactly is the offensive projection? I really don't care, to be honest, because I mean, we're looking at the overall target totals of Drake London in these last few weeks, 13, 7, 16, and 10. Yeah, the touchdown equity hasn't been there, but when you're getting that level of involvement, but you know, Kirk Cousins, again, still a talented quarterback. Yes, he's in a bad stretch. There's still the possibility that we see Kirk Cousins actually start playing some better football. And then we're also seeing the schedule open up in terms of the applied total for this team moving forward against against Las Vegas, against the New York Giants, and against the Washington Commanders in the next 3 weeks. So I will trust Drake London here as the next name.
Yeah, he was a hard one to place because his quarterback is playing awful right now. And he's also like, even though he's like an alpha, he's not like a bona fide alpha. Like he gets 27% target share is great, but like Darnell Mooney has his games. Like, I mean, Kyle Pitts doesn't do anything, but like he have games where Bijan Robinson is like the whole offense. You know what I mean? So with the Falcons and Drake London, I wanted to put him higher because I think the ability of the player and when the Falcons are playing well, like you could make the argument that Drake London belongs in a tier with like Tyreek and Lamb and AJ Brown.
Mid-season, he was a legit top 5 guy.
Yeah, he was. Exactly. It's difficult to get there right now with the way that Cousins is playing. So I mentioned when I picked Kupp that there was the wide receiver 5, the wide receiver 9, and the wide receiver 10 still on the board. Well, Neighbors was the 10, Kupp was the 9, and Higgins is the 9. Sorry. I'm rolling with T Higgins here because the Bengals have to throw their way out of games, and T Higgins is producing really well. Like, I mean, 16.6 PPR points per game. After a week, we just saw him be a no-show pretty much. He's been very good in every other game.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. Again, people might point risks like, oh, well, the Bengals are 5-8. Like, how long are they going to? I don't really care at this point, to be honest. T Higgins is an impending free agent, and T Higgins' perspective, he wants to get the biggest deal that he possibly can. He wants a $30 million+ deal from the New England Patriots. So people might throw around like, what if they shut him down? It's like, I don't buy it. Like, there's a difference between shutting Jamar Chase down, which again, I think is very rare circumstance that it happens, because they know in the offseason they're going to pay him $35 to $38 million per year. But T Higgins is an impending free agent, and you're the Cincinnati Bengals in a Joe Burrow window. There's no possibility that he gets shut down. So again, might seem people might be watching this like, why are you even mentioning that? There are other people in the crowd that will point that out, and I just want to defute any of those possibilities. So T Higgins was the 2nd highest rated receiver that I do have. I do have one guy rated higher, and I understand it's a murky projection because we do expect this quarterback to be out for the year. But at the same time, man, I mean, I can't fade away from Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, we're looking at a guy that, even with Trevor Lawrence missing this past week, was a bona fide alpha on this Jaguars team. When we're looking at Brian Thomas Jr. here, let me pull up the usage in these last couple of weeks. Yes, Trevor Lawrence is hurt. at the same time, since the bye week, 22 targets, over 150 receiving yards, scored a receiving touchdown, 18.7, 16.6 PPR points. Really, it's just betting on a young player with the speed on the outside, the vertical nature to create big plays. This is the spot where I have to have him. I can't lower him than this.
We are vastly different on this one.
Really?
Trust me, I love Brian Thomas.
Alpha level target share.
A dynasty perspective, I think he's an awesome player.
Yeah.
I don't think the fantasy production is following him for the rest of the year, given that Mac Jones is just certified butter cheeks.
It happened this week, and he had 16.6, and then last week he had 18.7, man. And he's getting 22 targets in those last 2 games. Like, I understand. I mean, is he CeeDee Lamb? No. But at the same time, CeeDee Lamb we're comfortable taking in the mid-wide receiver 1 territory. And I think if Brian Thomas Jr. is 85% of CeeDee Lamb, I think he can still make do.
Yeah, first of all, we're getting into an area where players are starting to blend together a lot more. So you could make the argument for players over each other for sure. But I have Brian Thomas Jr. at 27. And the reason I have him all the way down at 27 is because the Jaguars have the 4th worst passing schedule remaining.
I get it.
And I don't trust Mac Jones at all. I think he's terrible. I think that there's going to be plenty, like 2 of the next 3 games, the Jags are going to score like 6 points, in my opinion. So that's where I'm at with BTJ. I think he gets some targets, get there in PPR, but I just feel more confident in other players. And it has absolutely nothing to do with Brian Thomas Jr.'s ability.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't fade the ability. That's kind of where I'm at with it. Like when I'm looking at this wide receiver range, like you said, it does blend in, to be fair. George Pickens obviously dealing with an injury right now. Otherwise, he probably would have been the pick for me. DK Metcalf, we've seen the JSN emergence. Courtland Sutton, again, I think he's a strong option, but I also think I can get him a little bit later down the board. Same thing with Jerry Jeudy, a little bit more volatile of an option. Plus, I mean, we're seeing the highs of Jameis Winston right now. What about when we see him crash back low? I just think all these guys kind of have their own risk levels that trusting the talent level of Brian Thomas Jr. at 15 is where I land.
Yeah, there's it does sound like we're going to have a little bit of disagreement here starting now because some of the names you just mentioned are not like the next up names for me. So my next rated player here is Terry McLaurin.
He was in that range for me.
Yeah. So with McLaurin, I look at a guy who has been a top 11 receiver in points per game this year and has Jaden Daniels throwing him the ball. I feel a lot more confident in their projection over some of these guys with like shittier quarterbacks and bad schedules and things of that nature. They play the Saints this week and the Falcons in week 17. In between that is sandwiched with the Philadelphia matchup, which is not good for Terry McLaurin. He had like a dud against the Eagles a couple of weeks back, but he has performed historically pretty well against Philadelphia, and maybe they'll learn from the tape the first time that they played on that Thursday night game. So I don't know. I feel pretty good that Terry McLaurin is just going to be a consistent wide receiver 2 for the rest of the year, which is why I would go with him definitely over a guy like Brian Thomas, who I just feel a lot more concerned with the quarterback situation.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I mean, we do also get back to the point that he's not remotely the type of alpha level target share that some of these other guys
He has been this year.
Terry McLaurin? Terry McLaurin?
Yeah, McLaurin. No, not target share. Sorry, the play, like the ability and the touchdown scoring.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I'm talking about pure volume. 82 targets in 13 games just isn't comparable to some of these guys. That's kind of
no. He only has a 23% target share on the year, but I will take. Like, this is an age-old debate with wide receiver rankings all the time is, do you want a 23% target share on a great offense from a great quarterback, or do you want a 29% target share from a shitty offense and a shitty quarterback? Like, you can, pros and cons your way out of it. But when the good quarterback and the good offense has a pretty decent schedule and some high-scoring games come up, I will take the lower target share on the good offense.
Yeah, I'm just for me personally, I'm looking at Brian Thomas Jr. If he's getting 8-9 plus targets per game down the stretch, again, he's had 22 in his last 2 games coming out of bye. Rookie player, we usually see exponential growth down the year. Even if it's not the most valuable targets, man, the guy can take any one of them to the house. Yep,
no, definitely not a disagreement there. So what are you looking at here with your next pick?
Yeah, so you did take Terry McLaurin off the board. Now we're looking down the stretch, and it's funny because this is another guy that we didn't mention. And now, obviously, there is a risk level because he did miss this past game with a knee injury. So take it with a grain of salt. We don't really necessarily know what the true status of his knee is right now. But if we're assuming that Ladd McConkey's back next week, he's going to be my next player. And with Ladd McConkey, I mean, it's pretty simple. We've seen just this past week how different the Chargers offense looked with or without him on the field. He's their only true wide receiver getting separation. You're tethered to a top 5 level quarterback play with Justin Herbert, a guy that's been an alpha level target earner. And like we've mentioned multiple times since the bye week, we have seen the Chargers throw the ball more. I think he's got a wide receiver 1 level ceiling, assuming that knee holds up.
Yeah, no, he would have been my pick too. So we actually were in lockstep on that one. There's a number of guys that kind of factor into this territory for me. One of the guys that I think I'm going to go with, it just doesn't seem like it should be the right answer, but I think it is the right answer. And it's Courtland Sutton.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I look at Courtland Sutton this year, I look, first of all, at the fact that he plays the Colts, Chargers, and Bengals the last 3 weeks, which is all, exploitable matchups there. He's literally been a top 20 receiver or 21 receiver with a rookie quarterback who gets better seemingly by the week, and just had a bye week to kind of go back and digest some film and stuff too. So you got a good schedule, a rookie quarterback playing well. He's the clear alpha of this offense. I mean, he's 26% target share on the year. We know he scored 10 touchdowns last year. He's got a number of touchdowns this year with he's got a 46% target share of this team's end zone targets. Like, he's going to score, man. He's going to have games where he goes, 8 for 110 and 2 touchdowns. Like, I think that's definitely within his range of outcomes. So even though I don't think he's like as good as some of the receivers that are in this territory, he's definitely worth it here for fantasy.
Yeah, I think that was the correct pick. Honestly, I think this would be the range that Pickens would also find his way off, but I'm honestly terrified about the hamstring injury.
Yeah,
you guys are wondering about George Pickens right now. Mike Tomlin's already reported that he's going to be doubtful for week 15. It does sound like it's going to be a grade 2 hamstring injury. So, I mean, live pushing it, I did move him down even a little bit more. So we'll see where he ends up coming off the board here. My next pick is going to be DK Metcalf. We already talked about his teammate with JSN. It's funny that I ended up taking both Seahawks wide receivers. It's really simple. Yeah, obviously JSN's emerging in this offense, but when you're in wide receiver 2 territory, trusting the 6'4", 220-pound receiver in what's been a very good performing Seahawks offense. I mean, we talk about weekly ceilings. At this point of the year, you want a guy with a high weekly ceiling, and that is exactly what DK Metcalf is.
Yeah, I have a couple guys ranked ahead of where Metcalf is for me. I have him at 22 in my rankings right now.
He's 18 for me.
But I'm going to roll with another guy who is kind of just a target share dude. I'm going to roll with DJ Moore for the Chicago Bears here. He also, for what it's worth, we talked about him, 5-6 weeks back as a good trade target specifically for the playoff run, because he has the Vikings, Lions, and Seahawks, all of those games profiled to be pretty high scoring. And then the Vikings and Lions specifically very favorable to fantasy wide receivers. So pretty straightforward for me. I mean, DJ Moore also too, like of late, has been performing at a pretty high level. And as of right now, I don't know where he ranks in terms of overall fantasy scoring. I don't think it's like super high. I think he's wide receiver 15 overall, 13.3 PPR points per game, puts him, like wide receiver 26 or 27 in points per game. But he's playing his best ball now, which is why I feel the best about him. And Caleb is, I don't know, is Caleb playing better? Yeah, than he was early in the season. Do I think Caleb is going to go on some crazy run to end the year? No, but I think he's playing better than he was earlier in the year.
And the volume's been up there for Caleb.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, sure. Did they get shut down by the 49ers? Did they get embarrassed by the 49ers? Absolutely. But at the same time, when you're looking at the box score for Caleb in that game, you wouldn't have thought that they got absolutely thumped by the Niners. Because when you're looking at it, I believe he went, 17 for 23, pretty efficient. You're not going to play the 49ers pass rush against a depleted offensive line every single week. So I don't mind that call. I think DJ Moore would be a worthy pick here. He would be actually my highest rated player there. So that's exactly where I would have gone as well. My next rated player, and we're going to have a cause for disagreement here because I know for a fact you are sleeping on this guy, but
is it Jawan Jennings?
No, it's Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy, I mean, it's pretty simple. In these last 6 games, he's taken a complete step in this offense. Obviously, he has the trust for Jameis Winston. Is there a little bit of concern with Cedric Tillman coming back? Maybe, but at the same time, just off the back of these 6 games, he's vaulted all the way up to the wide receiver 11 in PPR scoring so far. And we've seen an evident weekly ceiling highlighted against Denver where he had over 40 PPR points. So really at this point of the year, he's playing well. I trust Jameis Winston in terms of the volume he's bringing to this offense. And even if it's not the most ideal matchups in week 15 and 17, I just want a guy that's going to be attached to an offense that may throw the ball 40 plus times a game.
Yeah, I'm a little lower on Jeudy. I have him at 27 right now. So I feel like he's running a little hot. He has a good schedule. Sure, they got high scoring games coming up, so I don't really disagree about any of that stuff. I just prefer some of the other guys. But I mean, given the production we've seen the last couple of weeks, I can't really say anything negative about Jerry Jeudy at this point in time. One guy that, like, this is a pick that I'm really struggling with. I got 3 players that all seem better in theory than they actually have performed. I'm going to go with Zay Flowers here.
I knew exactly that's where you're leaning.
So I was caught between Flowers, Marvin Harrison, and Devontae Adams, but I'm going to go with Flowers because I think Flowers represents kind of exactly why I picked St. Brown. It's just like, I think the Ravens are going to be in high scoring games. They're going to be performing on an offensive from an offensive standpoint. And even though the Ravens have to play the New York Giants, Pittsburgh Steelers the next 2 weeks, they do have the Houston Texans, the most important week that they are playing in week 17. And Flowers has been kind of consistently inconsistent. When he's giving you big performances, he kind of really blows up, but then he kind of disappears other times. I'm hoping that those big performances kind of all chain together when it matters most, because I just think the offense is good enough that he can perform every week.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear at this point of the year, the top two offenses in the NFL are the Baltimore Ravens and the Detroit Lions. So getting Tetherman to those offenses is not a bad strategy. Yeah, I don't mind that. He's the wide receiver 15 in PPR. Hasn't been a little volatile, sure, but at the same time, I don't really care about volatility when it comes to spike week potential in the playoffs, because I want guys that can win me my matchups, and we've seen Zay Flowers have that type of ceiling. So, yeah, good pick. I am back on the clock here. My next highest rated player, it would be Devontae Smith from the looks at it. So I am going to take Devontae Smith here. We kind of mentioned the case with A.J. Brown, the cons of this Eagles offense. The passing volume simply has not been there. We've seen Jalen Hurts 25 or less pass attempts in his last 9 starts as a quarterback. Fun fact, too, I actually talked about in the wide receiver rankings tier list. The Eagles in the last 2 years were teams that were throwing the ball, I believe, 32 times per game and 31 times per game. They're currently averaging less than 26 pass attempts per game. So it's clear as day that the volume simply has not been there. But I also think a factor of that was their wide receivers just simply haven't been healthy across the year. So I do think maybe in some more competitive game scripts down the stretch, we do see Devontae Smith. We know he's a top 12 level talent in the NFL. It really just comes down to, do we see this passing game emerge? And I'm willing to bet that it does.
Yeah, I buried Smith, man, and I'm historically a big Smith guy, but I have him at 30. The volume is really, really low right now. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't really trust the offense at this point in time to be putting up consistent passing numbers. Okay, we are into the final round of this draft. We're going to try and speed this up really quick. We'll go kind of 30 to 45 seconds per player just to get the top 36 done here. I'm going to go with Devontae Adams next. It is very simple explanation to why I picked Garrett Wilson. It's just that the offense is picking it up a little bit from a passing standpoint. They have an easy schedule with the Jaguars, the Rams, and the Bills left. And between Wilson and Adams, it's kind of like a pretty even split in terms of target share. So if I'm going to rank Wilson a little aggressively, I probably have to do the same with Adams.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I was actually caught between him and Devontae Smith. They were actually my top 2 rated wide receivers left. So, yeah, I really like that call as well. He is a guy that I have ranked at 25 rest of the season. And now I think this is where our real decision comes. Is this the George Pickens spot, or do you potentially go with more of an unknown wide receiver? I'm caught between 2 names, and the 2 names are George Pickens and Marvin Harrison Jr. I think both represent risk. With George Pickens, it has nothing to do with his ability. It has nothing to do with his volume. It has to do with his injury. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a complete inverse. We know this guy has a high ceiling, but he's extremely volatile on a week-to-week basis. Now, I'm going to take Pickens here with the caveat that there's going to be people out there watching this that have bye weeks in their fantasy football playoffs.
Right.
So I think that's part of the factor here. Obviously, again, if you're needing a guy to play this upcoming week, maybe you lean Marvin Harrison Jr., but with the factor that maybe some of you watching do have bye weeks, I think George Pickens, if you can afford the ability to not use in this upcoming week, has the opportunity to be a guy that we would take in the top 15 area. So getting him here if you're on a bye week at a 10 wide receiver type of discount, I think would be good. So with George Pickens, it's pretty simple. I mean, we're seeing him play like a wide receiver 1. He's getting alpha level usage, and Russell Wilson has really brought a big time passing element to this offense that we didn't see with Justin Fields.
Yeah, I ranked Pickens a little bit more bearish, just given the injury. I have him at 31, but he would probably be roughly 18 to 20 if I had to rank him fully healthy. I'm going to go with Harrison, since that was the guy that you were between. He would also be up there with me. It's all hypothetical right now. I can't really say much to say that Harrison should be here. I believe that he's going to start to play better, and I like the Cardinals schedule with the Patriots, the Panthers, and the Rams the next 3 weeks. And Kyler, for whatever reason, keeps being very inconsistent over the next couple of games. Harrison's just a good enough player. He scores touchdowns every other week. Literally, he scores touchdowns every other week if you look at his game logs. And again, I think he's a good player. That's pretty much all it comes down to. I cannot defend Marvin Harrison Jr. here. I can't. I just think this is where he should be ranked.
Yeah,
given the target share, the usage, and the player that I see when I watch him.
There's another name we'll talk about in a second that I feel the same about, that I think that they're a very good player tethered to a good offense, but they just haven't been playing well. I know you know who I'm referring to. We'll probably talk about him in the next few picks, but I can't go there yet. The guy that I have to go with, and I completely admit, is it sexless? Yes. Is it boring? Yes. Is it part of a bad offense? Absolutely. But I think we got to give Jacoby Myers his flowers. I really
I
do.
thought you were going to say Adam Thielen for a second.
No. Not that gross. Not that gross. Jacoby Myers, since the team traded away Devontae Adams, has quietly been one of the most consistent wide receivers in fantasy football. Like when we're looking at what he's done, week 3, I believe, was when Devontae Adams was on the injury report with a hamstring injury, aka begging for a trade to New York. Since that stretch, in healthy games, 9 targets, 10 targets, 9 targets, 7, 11, 6, 15, 11, 10 in that stretch. We're looking at a legitimate wide receiver 2 in fantasy, but because of his name value and because of the offense he's tied to, we're getting him at early wide receiver 3 territory. So I think he has to be ranked here because he doesn't have the evident weekly ceiling that some of the other options in front of him has. But at the same time, when you're talking about consistency, a guy that you can plug into your wide receiver 2 spot, into your flex, not many are better than Jacoby Myers right now.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. There's a cluster of 3 names right now who all play for bad teams. Weird to say it about one of the teams, but they all play for bad teams, quote unquote, that are just getting volume. And I'm going to take Juwan Jennings here, who also plays for a bad team, quote unquote, because that's what the 49ers have been this year. But he is actually a top 15 receiver in points per game right now. So I'm getting great production out of Juwan Jennings. Now, I tend to think that we will get a little bit of a Debo get right game over the next couple of weeks, especially because he's like tweeting stuff and they have no running back.
He
so maybe
tweeted that he's not getting used, even though he's second on the team in touches. Like, what are we talking about?
It's weird, but I think Jennings is playing a role that just lends itself to volume for this team. And the way that Purdy is playing, it's like they're constantly in like 3rd and longs because they can't run the ball because they're on their 5th string running back right now. So, I mean, you're pretty much in a position where Jennings is catching all these like 3rd and Juwan kind of plays.
Yeah, well, the thing with Juwan Jennings right now is his best route is the dig route, which is by far the most important route in the San Francisco playbook. So he's playing that outside wide receiver role perfectly for the scheme that they're running. Is Juwan Jennings a superstar talent? No. But he's playing some very good football because he's a perfect fit for what Shanahan wants to do. And I think he was well worthy to be the pick here. In fact, I believe him and a couple others would have been in my consideration. And it's funny because we just talked about Juwan Jennings, the save volume projection and maybe not the best situation. I'm going for the spike week guy next, man. We already talked about his teammate. This is a guy that probably even got you into the fantasy football playoffs. Maybe a guy that if you have him on your BBM teams, you're really excited about moving forward. Dude, if Jordan Addison's going to keep playing the way he has been these last few weeks, I think he has to be considered in this range. Is it the safest projection? Absolutely not, because we saw what the volume could look like in the middle portion of the year. However, big time yak ability, big playability, tethered to a top 5 level Minnesota offense. And if Sam Darnold's going to be playing fringe level MVP football, I think he has to find his name in this area.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you there. I can't quite get there with Addison because he is very, very boomer bust, feast or famine, like big plays or nothing kind of thing. So I have him a little bit lower than this. I view a guy like Calvin Ridley, who is the one that I'm going to take here, as a little bit more of a safer projection, just given that, since DeAndre Hopkins was traded, we have a guy who's consistently been getting targets. Like you look at his target total since then, you got 9 and 14, the 2 weeks like Hopkins was gone. Then you have 8, 9, 6, 6, 5, and 11. Like he's consistently getting targets and also has the 2nd or 3rd easiest schedule for fantasy wide receivers with the Bengals, Colts, and Jaguars the last 3 weeks of the year.
Yeah, I think that's fair for me. Honestly, with Addison, it's just looking at the touchdown equity he has in this offense right now. I mean, we're looking at in his last, what would that be, 6 games, he scored in every single one of them. He's actually outpacing what he did as a rookie. So that's kind of where I lean there. But at the same time, I do think you have a very good case here. So, here, Calvin Ridley. Sorry, I had a brain fart for a second. But let me just put Calvin Ridley in there.
And then you're on the clock here.
I'm back on the clock here. So we already took Jennings off the board. It's so funny that I just talked about Jordan Addison. I am between 2 guys that are very similar to Jordan Addison right now. I think you know exactly who I'm referring to.
I think I know one of them, but I'm not sure which one.
I don't know which one to lean here. I'm going to bite the bullet on him, dude. The offensive projection is too good. Like, I get it, dude. We had to eat a fucking donut from this guy this week, but he's too talented to have outside of this range, and he's attached to too good of an offense for me. And I understand you're going to bring up the concerns in a second because they are very, very valid, but
I would have picked 2.
Okay. Yeah. Like, if you have Jaden Reed, you'll know that it's been a season of ups and downs.
Yeah, I would have picked him over Addison, actually. I had it Ridley, Reed, and then Addison a little bit later down. So that's Jaden Reed he's the spike week king, man. He was literally like the skeleton key to Best Ball Mania last year. And it wouldn't shock me if he does the exact same thing yet again, because the Packers have the Seahawks this week on Sunday Night Football. Then they have the Saints and the Vikings week 16 and 17. Like, he very well could have two really, really strong performances over the next 3 weeks or whatever. So I get the 0 really sucks and nobody wants to start Jaden Reed right now. But he's too good, man. He's too good. And speaking of too good, slot receiver from the 2023 wide receiver class, Josh Downs needs to be in this list. He absolutely has to be in this list.
I had him in this list too.
When you go and look at Josh Downs, the player this year, only the 2 Rams receivers and Nico Collins have been better targets per route run earners than Josh Downs this season. Josh Downs, 13.8 PPR points per game. He's the wide receiver 25 in points per game right now, with all that has gone wrong for Josh Downs, which is, Richardson's had some terrible games. Flacco's had some terrible games. Downs has been in and out of the lineup with a number of different things, assuming he's healthy right now, because that's a little bit of a concern. And maybe this also applies to the point you said about Pickens, where if you have a bye, Josh Downs has an extra week to come off of it. He's just too good, man. He's simply too good. He has these big play upside type of plays. He gets too many targets. He's got to be in this top 36.
Yeah, I think you pretty much outlined it perfectly. Now we're at another decision point, because I think outside of this range, you have to make some really confident cases on these guys, because there's a lot of holes and there's a lot of good things going on with each of their profiles. I think the guy that I got to go with next, and this is solely based off the fact that I think he's a very talented player. The usage hasn't really been there in terms of overall snaps, but he is tethered to one of the top 3 overall MVP candidates. It's Amari Cooper. And I get it. When you look at his overall snaps this week, you think, well, what the fuck? He only played 53% of the snaps. Like, what is going on with the Buffalo Bills right now? Like, why is their most talented wide receiver not playing at a full-time role? But when the guy has 14 targets on 53% of the snaps and is only going to get healthier moving forward, it lends me to believe that we have a ceiling here that hasn't really been unearthed in this offense yet. And we've seen Amari Cooper in the past tethered to good offenses, obviously with the Cowboys. The Browns, again, weren't the greatest of offenses, but that little stretch when he was performing with Watson, it actually did look like a functional offense. And then we obviously see this year that when he's been on the field and when he's been targeted, he's been really efficient on his targets. Again, we're in a situation here where when we're talking about back-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 territory, I'm swinging for the fences, and I think Amari Cooper is one of the best fence swings that you can have in fantasy right now.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. I think you could definitely make the argument that his teammate should have been taken before him, because
it was close between him.
He's a top 24 receiver in scoring right now, Khalil Shakir. Like, he's been pretty consistent PPR guy. But if we're kind of projecting forward, I don't hate the take of Cooper ahead of him. I do have Shakir ranked higher. He actually would not be my next rated player, but he would be the player after that. I'm going to go with a spike week guy who's also a number 2 receiver. I'll take Jalen Waddle here.
Yep. And that was the other name I was referring to when I was talking about Jaden Reed, by the way.
Yeah. Waddle, at least, as of late, has played really well. So I have Waddle ranked this player, then Shakir is my next rated player, and then closing out my top 36 is Jordan Addison, Tank Dell, and then Amari Cooper's my 37.
Yeah. I have one more player that you might not, and I probably will end up taking at the last pick here. So we'll see in a second. But it's pretty simple with Waddle, like you said. I mean, 2 spike weeks in his last 3. We're just hoping that he continues playing like that guy rather than the guy that had single-digit PPR point scoring for 10 weeks straight. So
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. But like I said, I don't think you're going to have this guy here. I kind of do have to. I have DeAndre Hopkins here. I understand he's not playing full-time snaps, but when he is on the field like Amari Cooper, the guy's commanding targets, and that's pretty much where I lean on. You're attached to Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes has been playing better as of late. Travis Kelce hasn't been dominating the targets like we saw in the middle portion of the year, and we've seen DeAndre Hopkins. When the Chiefs need a play in the passing game, DeAndre Hopkins is the most sure-handed guy in that team.
Yeah, this is making me think we're going to look stupid for not having Deebo Samuel in this top 36. I know he's been really, really bad since week 7. It's been a long time since week 7. Deebo Samuel has one top 24 performance, one, and it was 12.6 PPR points. Nothing to write home about either. Like, it's not like he had in the first 5 weeks of the year, he had 3 in 5 games, and then he's just completely fallen off the face of the earth. Now, again, we're recording this before week 15's games. It would not shock me if on Thursday night, Deebo Samuel has a 28-point performance. It wouldn't shock me one bit if he has a monster game because he's bitching on social media that he's not getting the ball. They don't have any running backs. Would it shock me at all if Deebo carries the ball 8 times in this game and has a monster play out of it? No.
For 16 yards.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. I don't feel confident saying that Deebo is not a top 36 receiver rest of the season. That's the only person that I say, the one that makes us look really stupid here. Like I said, I have Tank Dell, Khalil Shakir right in this range that they would be here too. Darnell Mooney definitely
Darnell Mooney as well
here. Keenan Allen, even Adam Thielen too, given how he's playing right now. Those guys, Jamison Williams, if you're looking for spike weeks. There's a couple other guys you could maybe give shouts out to, but Deebo is the one guy that I think he probably belongs in this area. We just haven't put him here yet, and it might be recency bias. And honestly, I'm going to move him into this range because I think he deserves to be here.
I'm at 39. I can't do it yet personally.
I'd rather have him gun to my head. I would rather have Deebo Samuel than Tank Dell. Let's just put it that way.
I would too. I actually do have it ranked that way.
I had Dell at 36. That's why I'm saying I'd rather have him than Tank Dell. So he's in my top 36, but he doesn't quite make the list here because I have Hopkins not quite in this range given the snaps.
Yeah, for reference, the honorable mentions for me, like I said, I have Hopkins at 36. The other top 35 guys we already talked about in the video. 37 would have been Darnell Mooney, 38 Khalil Shakir, 39 Deebo Samuel, 40 Tank Dell. And then when you get to 41, 42, like you said, Keenan Allen and Adam Thielen.
Yep. Okay, so that ranks out our top 36. Again, I'm sure people are going to have gripes with what we did. Also, keep in mind, too, that this went in snake order. We maybe shouldn't have done that just for the ease of reading it. But it goes Chase, then to Wilson at 201, then to Devontae Adams at 301. The way that it reads out is our top 36. But I'm
just going to drag the notes across the screen real quick. So if you are reading it, for those of you that are out there, maybe that didn't make sense. This is how you're going to be following it. So first round like that, then you're going to take the snake there, and then you're going to take the snake there. So read it like this rather than that, and then that. Yeah,
exactly. So again, any disagreements, feel free to leave them down below in the comments. Again, it's very difficult to rank some of these guys. Hence why we do tier makers normally, because you can say, Drake London's in a tier with
the same tier,
Terry McLaurin or whatever. Like there are a lot of tier breaks in here that make a lot of sense. So hopefully we did a good enough job of outlining kind of where the tier breaks would be.
Yeah, we usually do it in a tier list format, but we thought, you know what, doing it in a draft format is going to give you guys some more value in terms of the individual player takes. Because like you said, when they're just in the tier, we're like, yeah, these guys kind of all profile similarly. But when you actually have to make the draft pick and say, okay, why did you choose Puka Nacua over Amon St. Brown? Why did you choose Tyreek Hill over AJ Brown? Those are things that we can actually get across to you guys in this type of format rather than just a tier list.
Yeah, exactly. So again, if you guys do want all of our rest of season rankings, wide receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, head on over to flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up for a 7-day for free trial there, 30% off any of the packages, 6 months for free if you sign up annually. You also get a team review, either for Dynasty, Redraft, whatever you want it for, when you sign up annually using that promo code FSE. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, comment any of your thoughts, agreements, disagreements down below. Subscribe if you're new around here. We will have a running back version of this video on Friday. In between that, I'll, of course, have matchups that matter tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning or whatever. I'm actually going to the Leafs Anaheim game Thursday night. So Danny will be live solo on the channel for Thursday night football preview there and Thursday night kickoff. So again, appreciate you guys for joining us. Peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.